Is the world engaged in a war against terror, or is it more accurate to say the West is waging a war against Islam? For the former Prime Minister of Malaysia, the latter is much closer to the truth. Mahathir Mohamad has branded George W. Bush a war criminal. He says there have been more My Lais in Iraq than there were in Vietnam, and he claims Jews run the world by proxy. But Mahathir doesn't save his barbs solely for the West. He says most Muslim communities are backward and miserable, and he says Muslim countries are poorly governed and incapable of development, partly because of faulty interpretation of the Quran. I'm Teymoor Nabili, and on this edition of 101 East, I talk to a man who's still dropping political bombshells long after stepping down from power. Mahathir, thank you for speaking to 101 East today. Why do you think that George Bush deserves to go down in history as a war criminal?
Because he's responsible for unnecessary killing of so many more people than Saddam Hussein. Now, if Saddam is considered as a criminal and deserves to be hanged according to him, then he is a worse criminal than Saddam.
But it's an internationally recognized situation that the rules of war have their own circumstances, and they are different to other circumstances. These people have died in the context of a war which the US can justify as they would have it.
In the first place, that war is illegal. Yeah, they went to war against Iraq despite the fact that the UN does not sanction it. And if we allow this kind of thing, then of course no weak country can feel safe despite having the United Nations. So that war is an illegal war, and any killing during that war would constitute murder.
Do John Howard and Tony Blair deserve the same treatment?
Same. They are the same. They are aiding and abetting, so to speak.
You are proposing the establishment of a tribunal to allow some victims of war crimes to state their case, and also, in your words, to bring to justice people like Bush and Blair and Howard. Is this just political posturing?
No. These victims have been trying to get justice for themselves. They have appealed to various international courts, but whereas the international courts would be ready to try people on Darfur and Rwanda and places like that, they seem to ignore the sufferings of the victims in Iraq and Palestine and elsewhere.
Many people will look at this and say, you're being inflammatory, looking for publicity, and they will point to the fact that there will be no comeback from this. There is no legitimacy here. They will look at other comments that you have made about the Jews running the world by proxy, and they will say that you don't deserve a hearing on the basis of things like this.
If they want to summon me and accuse me, I'm quite willing to face a neutral court like this. If they think that my accusation, my statements are inflammatory, and I have killed a few 100,000 people, by all means, call me. I will appear.
Let's address that issue of the Jews running the world by proxy, because that comment made a lot of headlines and caused a lot of offense to a number of people. Could you explain what prompted you to say that?
Well, because that's the truth. The fact is that there are only about 8 million Jews in America, but today they control the finances of the country, they control the media, they control the the film industry, and now they have gained control of many of the legislators, because they are the staff of the legislators.
They are a successful and well-educated people. Does the fact that they have high position necessarily cause a problem?
Well, it causes a problem, but the thing is that people have to be fair. If you gain position of authority or power, you must not abuse it.
What abuse are you referring to?
They are influencing the United States into taking actions which are actually bad for the American people.
Is it your position that the Palestinian situation is the key driver to the problems that we face now?
Yes, yes, very much so. 60 years ago, you don't see this thing. There may be trouble in the Middle East, but you don't see this kind of willingness to blow themselves up because they have no other recourse.
So what brought us to this point?
The desire of the Europeans to solve their problem by creating an Israeli state on other people's territory.
So would you side with Ahmadinejad of Iran in suggesting that Israel's position is untenable and it should cease to exist?
It was not established in a way that takes into consideration the wishes of the people in that particular area. But we accept that it is now a fact, and it is very difficult to remove Israel from the map of the world. That extent I would accept, but I will not accept Israeli incursion and settlements in Palestine and their control over the whole of Palestine.
What is the international way forward on this issue then?
Well, they should resolve that problem.
How?
How is for Israelis to go back to Israel and allow the people who were in that place before to go back and reclaim their houses, their land, their farms, because those were their property. No compensation has been paid, and for 60 years, these people who have been chased out of Israel have to live in tents in refugee camps.
To what extent does that state of affairs have responsibility for the broader Middle Eastern problem, for the generation of this war in Iraq and what we seem to be seeing now, which is a major global conflict?
A lot. It has a lot to do with what is happening in the Middle East. When you oppress the Palestinian and nobody comes to help them, then you create a lot of anger in the region, and because of that, there are many people who will volunteer to even kill themselves, because, as you know, it wasn't the Palestinians who crashed their planes into the World Trade Center, somebody else from elsewhere. That shows that the feeling is widespread. Until the United States and the Western world stop being in a state of denial, this thing is not going to be resolved.
When you say elsewhere, I'm assuming you mean Saudi Arabia. How do you explain the division here in the Muslim world between friendship for the United States and antagonism towards the United States?
Well, Saudi Arabia has got its own reason why it should be friendly with the United States. It doesn't mean that all Muslim countries must have identical perception of things or identical ideas or identical policies.
But you yourself, just before you stepped down, actually criticized the extreme elements of Islam are taking over government institutions.
I criticize because they are not following the teachings of Islam, the fundamental teachings of Islam as found in the Quran and the Hadith, the verified Hadith.
So in that respect, you actually have more in common with the Western perspective, which is that Islam is becoming militant.
Not at all. What happens is that in the West, they term the whole Islam as being a religion that teaches people to become terrorists. That is not true. Nor are they correct when they say these are Muslim fundamentalists, these are Muslim deviationists, people who deviated from the teachings of Islam. And you cannot call Malaysia a moderate country. We are not moderate. We are just following the teaching, the proper teachings of the religion.
Should you therefore maybe be spending more time on encouraging the moderate voice of Islam?
No, not moderate. I am telling people to go back to the fundamentals of Islam, not moderate. If
Those
you
fundamentals
go back,
therefore are not moderate?
If you follow the fundamentals of Islam, then you will be very tolerant, you will be very well educated, you will be very progressive. That is what Islam teaches us. But these people who make Islam appear to be an extremist religion, these are people who are not really going to the fundamental teachings of Islam. It's their own interpretation.
The far right in US political circles would say that there is a cohesion amongst the Arab peoples, at least, if not the states that represent them, to wage war against the West and to come together in a terrorist manner. Do you agree with that?
No, I don't agree that there is cohesion. These people are Arabs. Of course, they feel sympathy for other Arabs. And what they are doing is something that they have to do in desperation. They don't have battleships, they don't have warplanes, they don't have tanks. So what do? All they could do was to tie bombs to themselves and blow themselves up.
And that, to the right wing in the States, is enough. I mean, Bernard Lewis, with whom you are well familiar, who came up with the Clash of Civilizations
bombing a country, killing innocent people, children and all that, that is terrorism, because the people who are waiting to be bombed are terrified of what is going to happen to them. So the United States is guilty of terrorism.
And 1 second to go.
You said in a speech in Islamabad last year, and I quote, "They, Muslims, need to have nuclear weapons too, because the possession of such would, only through the possession of such would their enemies be deterred." The thought of nuclear weapons is something that frightens the entire world, Muslim and non-Muslim alike.
We are frightened. We are frightened of the nuclear powers. If the nuclear powers have a right to deter us from attacking them, why cannot we have the right to deter the nuclear powers from attacking us? Who is attacking whom at this moment? Are the Muslims going around conquering other countries? No, they are not. They're just defending themselves.
Well, the argument now is that Iran has exactly that intention, to go around conquering other countries.
To deter other people from attacking Iran. Iran has been attacked by Iraq before at the instigation of the United States. For 8 years, they lost 1 million people. If the United States lose 1 million people, you know what the United States is going to do? It's going to bomb the rest of the world.
President Ahmadinejad has been quoted and interpreted in many ways as suggesting that Israel would be a target should Iran have nuclear weapons. Is that a misinterpretation?
It would be a target if Israel attacks Iran or participates in a war against Iran. Why not? If Iran is a target, why is this Israel is sacrosanct, cannot be a target for anybody? Who is terrorizing whom in Palestine? Not the Palestinian, it's the Israelis. They smash up Jenin in houses with people in it were just bulldozed. Who is the terrorist?
Let's look to the future a little bit and stick with the Iran theme, if we might. Is it your feeling that President Bush has Iran in his targets?
Well, he has, but I think he would be making a very big mistake if he thinks that he can get away with the kind of thing he did to Iraq.
Do you think it's his intention to do exactly that?
Well, he is naive enough to think that because you have the weapons, you can do what you like.
You have said in the past that leaders like to think in terms of how history will remember them. Yeah. How do you think history will remember you?
I don't care. I don't care. I do what I think is right. If people want to remember me, they can remember me. When I was Prime Minister, one of the things I did not allow was to have any personality cult. I refused to allow my pictures to be shown in the public places. Unfortunately, people just disregard me.
You may not care, but do you have a sense of maybe what people will remember you for?
No. It doesn't matter. People are very fickle. Historians will debunk everything. You may be praised by one person, you may be debunked by the other. So what? You're not around anyway.
Many people have looked back on your tenure as Prime Minister in Malaysia and suggested that your position is what has made the problems worse in Malaysia with regards to the ethnic divides. Would you accept that as a criticism?
I wouldn't accept that. You go and ask them. Go and ask the Chinese, the Indians, do they hate me because of their religion?
A lot of them say that the fact that schools are now segregated along ethnic lines is partly because of
No.
our policies.
It is normal in any country to have a national school system, national education system. But Malaysia is generous enough to allow schools to be in the language of the people who are not Malays, not Muslim. You look in other countries, which country actually supports education in the language of the immigrants?
One of the other criticisms that is adjunct to this is the idea that speaking out against what the government has been saying is not encouraged in Malaysia.
I don't know now, but during my time, I was criticized right, left, and center by the people. The only thing is that you don't read the vernacular press. They have nothing good to say about me when I was Prime Minister.
And many of them argue that their opinions were squashed and not allowed freedom to air.
It's a democracy. We are the majority. Every time we go for elections, people still elect us, which means they endorse, they approve of what we are doing. Unless, of course, you say that minorities must have priority over the majority.
Is the racial tension in this country in any way a consequence of the new economic policy, which does elevate one race above another?
No, it doesn't elevate one race above another. It's trying to equalize the status of all the races.
It seems that, in fact, it's a form of positive discrimination.
Yes, it is.
Which is not an act of equality, it's an act of actual creation of a separate state of affairs.
No, other people have tried. Of course, they have been stopped, but we feel that had we not had the new economic policy, the situation today would be so bad that there will be fighting between the different races.
Do you think
take away all that we have done under the NEP and leave the Malays very, very poor, not living in the cities. They will come into the cities and burn it up. They did this in 1969.
There are many who say that the new economic policy is in fact responsible for making sure that the Malay population has less incentive to better itself than it would otherwise have had.
Take it away and you see what happens.
So
take away whatever that has been achieved through the NEP and leave the Malays as farmers planting rice, and you see what will happen in this country.
Okay, one final question then. How do you see the current political climate resolving itself? The final 2 years of President Bush's tenure would appear to have him in a position of a lame duck, as many people say, and yet the threats seem to be outstanding. Do you have any fears for the next 2 years?
I worry because this man is contemptuous of everybody else, not only of the UN. Now he's saying that as Commander-in-Chief he can send the 20,000 troops whether Congress agrees or not. And this is the kind of people elected by a democratic government. It makes one thing whether democracy is the great thing that it is supposed to be. You can one day elect a madman who will press a button and launch a nuclear war.
Tun Mahathir, thank you very much indeed.
You're welcome. If Saddam is considered as a criminal and deserves to be hanged, according to him, then he is a worse criminal than Saddam.
But it's an internationally recognized situation that the rules of war have their own circumstances, and they are different to other circumstances. These people have died in the context of a war which the US can justify as they would have it.
In the first place, that war is
solely for the West. He says most Muslim communities are backward and miserable, and he says Muslim countries are poorly governed and incapable of development, partly because of faulty interpretation of the Quran. I'm Teymoor Nabili, and on this edition of 101 East, I talk to a man who's still dropping political bombshells long after stepping down from power.
It's illegal. they went to war against Iraq despite the fact that the UN does not sanction it. And if we allow this kind of thing, then of course no weak country can feel safe despite having the United Nations. So that war is an illegal war, and any killing during that war would constitute murder.
Do John Howard and Tony Blair Tun Mahathir, thank you for speaking to 101 East today. Why do you think that George Bush deserves to go down in history as a war criminal?
Because he's responsible for unnecessary killing of so many more people than Saddam Hussein. Now,
Is the world engaged in a war against terror, or is it more accurate to say the West is waging a war against Islam? For the former Prime Minister of Malaysia, the latter is much closer to the truth. Mahathir Mohamad has branded George W. Bush a war criminal. He says there have been more My Lais in Iraq than there were in Vietnam, and he claims Jews run the world by proxy. But Mahathir doesn't save his barb